What is it that makes games look like they were released more than 20 years ago so frightening? From smaller games such as No Players Online, Iron Lung, and Buckshot Roulette, to full experiences like Faith the Unholy Trinity, Lethal Company, Cry of Fear, and Voice of the Void, this style of horror seems to have taken the gaming world by storm. And for good reason. Many of these games offer something that AAA horror hasn't offered for many years, and that is actually being scary. Now before you get your pitchforks, let me explain. See, we've seen the same style of horror game in the mainstream for years now, mainly that of the survival horror and jump scare fest. But after so many games that follow a similar format to Resident Evil and Silent Hill, the games get somewhat dull. Because of that big gap in the AAA gaming sphere, many of the people begin to look towards the indie sphere of games, which is focused a lot more on telling their own individual stories and making sure that whoever is playing the game is truly frightened. See, the way for these games to get any sort of publicity is by scaring people in a way that's not just scary to the person playing, but also the people that are watching the same person playing it. I'm serious when saying this. Many times when a new horror indie game is released, the horror game creator will be trying to make it so YouTubers will find it fun, as well as being able to be scared by it easily. As we've seen, many games have been able to do this successfully with a certain formula. One of the most famous examples of a game riding the success of YouTubers is that of Five Nights at Freddy's, which does follow what many other horror indie games would do later. We'll get to why that was successful at a different time. See, when people played FNAF for the first time, they got scared, like really scared. Because of having such a unique premise, it lured in viewers, causing the game to blow up rapidly, becoming the huge phenomenon that we know it as today. But before we go any further within the video, remember to like and subscribe, and if you watch the video all the way through, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And I respond to as many as I can, so just let me know your thoughts and I'll try to respond to them. Now let's get back on with the video. See, after the success of FNAF, we saw many games trying to recreate the success that FNAF had with the same formula in order to make their games at the same level of success. And because of that, we got the mascot horror game genre, which blew up rapidly and has become insanely saturated by horrible games trying to copy the successful formula of the original FNAF game, like Poppy Playtime and Garten of Banban. But what does this have to do with the retro horror games, you may be asking? Well, to answer that, we need to look at what made FNAF work so well in the first place and why it blew up to such a big degree. First off was the atmosphere. FNAF's atmosphere in the original game is nothing short of superb, immediately immersing the player to the atmosphere of what's going on, allowing the horror of what's going on to resonate with the player immediately. And it goes down to even the subtle things like the sound design of the game, letting you know everything location is slightly off. And it also allows the viewer of the game to figure things out themselves instead of explain it all to them, as it shows things through small paper clippings that explain the story of what's going on. And by not explaining things to you, it allows your mind to wander, and it creates a good fear of the unknown while playing the game, and it makes you on edge the whole time while playing. And I think it does it masterfully, and it allows the atmosphere of the game to really build on the person playing, as the fear of the unknown in the game is just so strong, and it allows you to just be in fear while playing. And it's really a unique experience, and it does it so well in especially the first game. Then there's the monster design and build up to the actual scare. See, the monster design of the original FNAF animatronics is nothing short of spectacular, immediately making the viewer recall real life examples of animatronics such as Chuck E. Cheese, and allowing the viewer to recognize these as nightmare scenarios of those same characters, and allowing people to remember the monsters of the game for years. And then the build-up made it perfect for people to get afraid, causing the player to become extremely uncomfortable while playing the games. Because of that, it made it perfect for YouTubers to play the games, as they were able to make crazy reactions due to the extremely unsettling atmosphere and the memorable monster designs of the animatronics. Now it's time to finally relate this formula back to the retro style of horror games that's the whole main video is about. Let's talk about the first major horror game to do this style of horror in a way that people remember. In 2018, a small horror game called Baldi's Basics would be released after being made in a local game jam. And this game, while following a lot of the principles that made games like FNAF popular in the first place, but it did something quite different from many of its predecessors. See, it had the memorable monster with Baldi and had a good atmosphere as well as a good build up for the reactions, and also it did appeal a little bit more to younger ages, allowing kids to watch the gameplay as well, as it was like a horror game for kids almost, as it was a almost parody of a lot of the other mascot horror games, and it does it perfectly in a way that it's also still kid friendly, so it made it a mass appeal game. But it did something that many other horror games at the time didn't do, and that was the art style of the game. See, it was made to look like an old edutainment game like the ones of the 90s that many schools forced students to play, but it kept the aesthetic for the whole game, giving the game an almost haunted gaming experience, like this was something from your childhood that had been corrupted and turned into this big monster. And that's what made Baldi so interesting, is it was almost like you were playing an old edutainment game that had gotten completely corrupted by some sort of evil virus. And the really simplistic art design left a lot more up to the imagination, as there's something inherently creepy about the unpopulated halls of the school as you wander it alone with no idea of what you were doing, as you hear Baldi slowly following you, whacking his ruler. And it creates a fear of the unknown, as you don't know where he is. He's just getting slowly closer and closer to you, and you hear him but you don't see him always, and that makes it really creepy while playing it. Now, I'm not saying that Baldi did this first, I know it did not, and as many games have used the older aesthetic game in the past, but I believe that Baldi's Basics was the first to do it in a way that made the genre blow up rapidly on YouTube. And because of all that, Baldi's Basics blew up, and when I say it blew up, I mean it blew up in the same level as FNAF. It was in everywhere and you just couldn't avoid it. They even made songs about this fucking game. And sorry, I need to interject a little bit. I think this game is pretty bad. It's not my kind of game. I know it did affect the history of these kind of games, but I don't think it's a really great game. I think it's just a joke game that got taken a little bit too far, that many people thought was actually a really scary game, even though it's just a joke game. After that, the next game I think would blow up in a similar vein, which was a much smaller game, but I think the game being small actually helped us, allowed YouTubers to cover it in one single video instead of having to split it into multiple parts. That was of course the 2019 game No Players Online. This game fits the aesthetic completely for what makes a popular YouTube horror game, and I mean that in the fullest way possible. It has an atmosphere that is so well done that if you played it, you'd immediately be put on edge, as it's something that every single player has experienced in their life: an empty lobby in a multiplayer game. But imagine if you weren't actually alone, but were being followed and watched by a shadowy monster. See, the atmosphere of this game is great, and it made you immediately unsettled with the game the moment you booted it up, and what made it even better was the PS1 style graphics. See, the PS1 style graphics made it more frightening, as it made it so things in the distance were harder to see, and something about it, similar to things like the Source engine, just really give the game an unsettling vibe that you can't beat. The monster design for the game is also spectacular, because even though it's just a shadow monster, it's pixelated and generally kept far away enough to make it so every single time you spotted it, you would be able to immediately be put on edge. But even though these two have been extremely successful, we hadn't reached the tipping point for the retro horror games quite yet. See, the tipping point wouldn't come till 2022, that of course being the crazy game that perfected a lot of the things that we talked about earlier, as the atmosphere on it is on point throughout. The build up to the final scene is extreme, making it so you're on edge of your seat throughout, and the final scare catches you completely off guard with a terrifying and memorable monster. That of course being the game Iron Lung. Iron Lung has you inside of a sub underneath a blood red ocean as you navigate without being able to say anything besides a map. And that makes the game so unsettling because the atmosphere is literally just the one room, as you have to listen to the sounds of the creaking sub as it gets almost caught in this awfully tight submarine, as it sounds like it's going to explode and implode on you at any minute, as you don't feel safe at all while inside of it. And it doesn't help that throughout the game you're given hints that you are in fact not safe whatsoever in this ocean, as you see multiple remnants of it, things that are much bigger than you inside of the ocean. And the PS1 style graphics really perfected the horror in this game, as it makes it so you can't really see enough to make it for you to figure out what's going on, but it also gives you enough to make it so your fear of the unknown is activated. But you've probably heard enough about Iron Lung over the years, so the game was the penultimate game for YouTube, as it was just short enough to make it so many YouTubers could complete it in a single video, but also long enough to make it so that many viewers would want to try it themselves. And the game would then open the floodgates for the retro style of horror: Buckshot Roulette, Voice of the Void, Faith the Unholy Trinity, Lethal Company, so on and so forth. This style of game blew up rapidly, and due to the easy marketing from YouTube, YouTubers, their success was almost guaranteed at this rate, as many of the games would have a high level of quality to them while also being extremely cheap. And what made it so great and scary was just how much of a change of pace many of these games were. They were more focused on building a scary atmosphere to scare you throughout the whole experience, and not just through the small sections of the game with jump scares. And the games were also helped by the lower graphics, as it leaves them more up to the viewer's imagination, allowing their minds to wander and creates more of a fear of the unknown than their better graphics counterparts.